You're 42 years old, lying awake at 2 a.m., doing math you don't want to do. Rent. The card balance you don't say out loud. The retirement account you haven't opened in months because you're scared of the number. And somewhere in that silence, a thought creeps in. Quiet, but sharp. It's too late for me. I want you to sit with that thought for one more second, because I've heard it before. From my own mouth, actually a long time ago, in a kitchen I don't live in anymore. Here's what nobody tells you at 2 a.m. That number on the screen isn't a verdict. It's a starting line you haven't noticed yet. Stay with me for the next hour. Not because I'm going to hype you up, I won't. But because I'm going to show you something most people your age never get shown. The real math, the real timeline, and the real reason 40 isn't your deadline. It's your turning point. Let's begin. Let's talk about the story you've been told your whole life. The one that says your 20s and 30s are for building, and everything after 40 is just managing the damage. Nobody sat you down and said those words directly. But you felt it, didn't you? In the birthday jokes about being over the hill. In the ads that only show young couples buying their first house. In the quiet comparison you make every time a 30-year-old on your feed announces they just made their first million. That story has a name. Financial planners call it the lost decade myth. The idea that if you haven't built real wealth by 40, you've missed your window. That the game is basically over, and now you're just playing defense until retirement. If retirement even happens for you. I want you to actually look at the data with me. Not the fear, the numbers. The Federal Reserve's own survey of consumer finances shows something most people never hear. Peak earning years for Americans are between 45 and 54. Not 25, not 30. 45 to 54. That's not an accident. That's decades of experience, skill, and relationships finally converging into leverage you didn't have at 25, even if you can't see it yet. Here's the part that gets left out of the panic narrative. Net worth doesn't grow in a straight line. It grows in a curve, flat, almost invisible for years, and then it bends upward, sometimes sharply. Once income catches up to experience, and debt starts shrinking instead of growing. Most people quit believing in the curve right before it bends. That's the tragedy. Not that the curve doesn't exist. That people stop trusting it exists. Think about compound interest, but not the textbook version. Think of it as trust over time. Money invested consistently doesn't just add up. It multiplies quietly, in the background, while you're living your life, raising your kids, showing up to work on days you didn't want to. It doesn't care that you started late. It only cares that you started. I've talked to men and women in their 40s, 50s, even 60s who assumed the door was closed. And what I found wasn't a string of miracles. It was math. Simple, patient, unglamorous math. A person who starts investing $400 a month at 40, assuming a conservative 7% average return, has roughly $240,000 by 65. Not a fortune, but not nothing. Not too late. Not game over. Now here's where I need you to be honest with yourself for a second, because the myth isn't just wrong. It's expensive. Every year you believe you're behind is a year you don't start. And the only real danger in this whole conversation isn't your age. It's inaction disguised as realism. You were taught that 40 was a deadline. I'm telling you, with the numbers to back it up, that 40 is closer to your peak earning years, your peak clarity, your peak ability to make decisions without the noise of your 20s clouding your judgment, the noise of trying to impress people, trying to keep up, trying to prove something to someone who was never really watching that closely in the first place. There's a strange kind of freedom that shows up around this age, if you let it. You stop comparing your chapter 3 to someone else's chapter 1. You start asking better questions. Not, how do I get rich fast, but how do I build something that lasts? That question alone changes everything about how you handle money from here forward. I'm not telling you this to make you feel better for 5 minutes and then go back to the same fear tomorrow. I'm telling you this because the data is real, the timeline is real, and the only myth in this entire story is the one that told you it was already over. I think about the men and women I grew up around, the ones who worked hard, paid their bills on time, raised good kids, and still lie awake feeling like failures because their bank account doesn't match some invisible scoreboard nobody ever showed them the rules to. That scoreboard was never fair. You don't owe your life to a scoreboard you didn't design and never agreed to play by. What you owe yourself is honesty. And the honest truth is this: 40 isn't the finish line creeping up behind you. It's the halfway mark of a much longer race than you were led to believe. Careers keep extending. Second acts keep multiplying in every industry. The idea that your financial story has to be fully written by 40 was never true. It was just repeated often enough to feel true. Let that sink in, because it changes the lens you're about to watch the rest of this video through. You're not chasing lost time. You're standing at the exact point where experience and opportunity finally start working together instead of against each other. It's not over. It's just getting started. And in the next part, I want to show you exactly where most people your age go wrong. 3 specific mistakes that quietly made you feel behind, even when you were doing more right than you realized. Let's talk about the 3 mistakes. Not to shame you. I've made at least 2 of them myself. But because once you see them clearly, you can't unsee them. And once you can't unsee them, you can start undoing the damage faster than you think. The first mistake is lifestyle inflation. It's the quiet one. The one that never feels like a mistake while it's happening. Because it dresses itself up as progress. You get a raise, and the first thing that happens isn't more savings. It's a slightly nicer car, a bigger house than you needed. Dinners out that used to be special occasions and became habits. None of it feels reckless in the moment. Each decision, on its own, looks reasonable. A new couch, a better vacation, a phone upgrade you didn't strictly need but felt like you'd earned. But here's what nobody tells you about lifestyle inflation. It doesn't just eat your extra income, it resets your baseline. Once you're used to a certain standard of living, going backward feels like failure, even when going backward is exactly what would set you free. So you keep earning more, and somehow you keep feeling just as tight, just as behind, just as far from the number you thought you'd have by now. I've sat with people who make 6 figures and feel poorer than they did a decade ago. Not because the money isn't there, because the money has nowhere to land. It gets absorbed before it ever gets the chance to grow. The undo isn't about deprivation, it's about awareness. Look at your last 3 months of spending. Not with judgment, just with honesty. Find one recurring expense that grew quietly without a conscious decision behind it. Not the coffee, the real one. The subscription you forgot exists. The upgrade you didn't need. Redirect just that one thing into an account you don't touch. That's the whole move. Small, deliberate, repeatable. The second mistake is comparison culture, and this one is more dangerous because it doesn't just cost you money. It costs you peace. You see someone's highlight reel online and assume it's their whole story. The vacation photo, not the credit card bill behind it. The new car, not the loan. The "we bought our dream home" post, not the 2 incomes and the family down payment help that made it possible. Comparison doesn't just make you feel behind. It makes you make decisions you wouldn't otherwise make. Decisions driven by what other people appear to have, instead of what you actually need. That's how people end up financing a lifestyle they can't afford, chasing an image instead of building a foundation. Here's the undo. Every time you feel that comparison pull, ask yourself one honest question. Am I making this decision because it moves me toward my own goals, or because it moves me away from feeling embarrassed? That single question, asked consistently, will save you more money over a decade than any budgeting app ever could. The third mistake is the quiet one: delayed investing. Not because you didn't want to invest, but because life kept handing you reasons to wait. The timing never felt right. The market felt too uncertain, or you told yourself you'd start once you had extra money, once things settled down, once the kids were older, once the raise came through. But there's no such thing as extra money. There's only money you decided to prioritize, and money you decided to spend on something else. Waiting for the perfect moment to invest is like waiting for the perfect moment to start exercising. The moment doesn't arrive. You create it, or you don't. The undo here isn't complicated, and it isn't about timing the market. It's about starting with whatever you have today, even if it feels small. $100 a month, automated, untouched, is worth infinitely more than the perfect plan you never started. Time in the market has always mattered more than timing the market. And at 40, you still have more time than the panic in your chest wants you to believe. Here's what ties all 3 of these together: lifestyle inflation, comparison, delayed investing. None of them are about lacking discipline. They're about lacking awareness. Nobody sat you down at 25 and taught you this. You were handed a paycheck and a world full of noise, and you did the best you could with what you knew at the time. That's not a character flaw. That's just a starting point. And starting points can be corrected at any age, with any amount of money, as long as you're honest about where you actually are, instead of where you think you should be by now. The truth is, you weren't behind. You were just taught the wrong game. And the moment you stop playing by rules that were never designed with your life in mind, everything starts to shift. Not overnight, but steadily. The way real change always happens. In the next part, I want to walk you through the actual numbers. What financial freedom really looks like starting at 40. With real timelines, real math, and a plan simple enough to start tonight. Let me show you something I truly wish someone had shown me at 40, instead of letting me guess my way through it for another 5 long years. Picture 2 people. One starts investing at 25, the other starts at 40. Both put in $300 a month. Both get a conservative 7% average annual return. By the time they hit 65, the 25-year-old has close to $700,000. The 40-year-old has around $280,000. I know what that comparison feels like the first time you hear it. It feels like proof that you missed it, that the door really did close behind you. But stay with me, because that comparison is only telling you half the story. And the missing half changes everything. The 25-year-old in that example rarely exists the way we imagine. Most people in their 20s aren't investing $300 a month consistently for 40 straight years. They're paying off student loans, switching jobs, figuring out rent, making mistakes nobody warned them about. The clean, uninterrupted 40-year timeline is a spreadsheet fantasy, not a real human life. You, at 40, are not that spreadsheet fantasy either. But here's what you have that the 25-year-old doesn't. Income. Real, established income, closer to your peak earning years than you've ever been. And income is the lever most people ignore when they only look at time. Let's run the real numbers, the ones that actually matter for someone starting today, right now. If you're 40, and you invest $500 a month at a conservative 7% return. By 65, you're looking at roughly $480,000. Increase that to $800 a month. Very achievable during your peak earning decade. And you're closer to $760,000. That's not a rounding error. That's a real retirement. And this doesn't even account for catch-up contributions, which the IRS specifically allows for people 50 and older, letting you put significantly more into retirement accounts than younger investors are permitted to. The system, whether you realized it or not, was quietly built with people like you in mind. Here's the timeline I want you to actually hold on to, because vague hope doesn't build wealth. Specific numbers do. From 40 to 50, your job is foundation. Get any high-interest debt down. Build an emergency fund that actually covers 3 to 6 months of expenses, not just the idea of one. Start automated, unglamorous investing, even if it's small at first. From 50 to 60, your job is acceleration. This is when catch-up contributions kick in. This is when your income is often at its highest, and your major expenses, kids, mortgages, the chaos of your 30s, are often starting to shrink. This is the decade where the curve I mentioned earlier finally starts to bend upward in a way you can feel, not just see on paper. From 60 to 65 or 70, your job is protection. Shifting some risk out of aggressive growth and into stability, so the wealth you built doesn't evaporate the moment you need it most. This isn't about fear. It's about respecting what you built enough to protect it. Notice what's missing from that entire timeline. There's no shame anywhere in it. No, you should have started at 22. No lecture at all. Just a sequence. Foundation, acceleration, protection that works whether you're starting today or you started decades ago and lost your way somewhere in the middle. I want to be honest with you about something else, too. None of this works without one uncomfortable ingredient: consistency, not intensity. Not a dramatic 6-month sprint followed by burnout. Consistency. The boring, unglamorous decision to keep showing up month after month, whether the market is up or the market is down, whether you feel motivated or whether you're just going through the motions. That's the real secret nobody wants to hear, because it doesn't make a good headline. It's not a trick. It's not a hack. It's just time, applied honestly, starting from wherever you actually are instead of where you wish you'd started. And you have more of that time left than the fear in your chest is currently letting you believe. In the next part, I want to go somewhere most financial videos never go. The part of this that isn't about numbers at all. Because the real reason most people don't start over isn't math, it's shame. And I want to talk to you about that, honestly, the way I wish someone had talked to me. Before we get there, sit with this for a moment. Every number I just gave you assumes one thing, and only one thing: that you actually start. Not perfectly, not with the ideal amount. Just start today with whatever number feels honest and true for your life right now. The rest, the timeline, the acceleration, the protection, none of it matters until that very first month actually happens. I want to tell you something most people won't say out loud on a finance video because it doesn't sound like finance at all. It sounds more like therapy. But I've watched enough people, myself included, and I can tell you the honest truth. The biggest obstacle to starting over financially at 40 was never math. It was shame. Shame has a particular way of showing up in a person's life. It doesn't announce itself directly. It doesn't say, "I am ashamed of my bank account." It shows up disguised as excuses. "I'm just not a numbers person. I'll deal with it after the holidays. I don't want to think about it right now." Every one of those sentences sounds practical, but underneath them, if you're honest, there's usually something quieter and heavier. A fear of confirming what you already suspect, that you're behind, that you failed, that everyone else figured this out already, and somehow you didn't get the memo. I want you to notice something about that fear, because it's important. It's almost never really about the money. It's about what the money represents. For a lot of people, especially people who grew up believing that being a good provider, a responsible adult, a capable person, meant having your finances together. A shaky bank account doesn't just feel like a number. It feels like a verdict on your worth. That's the lie shame tells you. That your net worth is your self-worth. That the two numbers are somehow the same thing. They're not. They were never the same thing. One measures what you've accumulated under a specific set of circumstances, some of which you controlled, and many of which you didn't. The other measures who you are, how you show up for people, how you handle hard things, whether you keep your word, whether you're still trying even when trying is uncomfortable. Here's something I've noticed over and over again in the people who actually manage to turn things around after 40. It's never the ones who feel the least shame who move fastest. It's the ones who stop letting shame make the decisions. The shame is still there. It doesn't disappear because you decided to open a spreadsheet. But they stopped letting it drive. Think about what shame actually does to your financial behavior, practically speaking, day to day. It makes you avoid opening the banking app. It makes you avoid the conversation with your spouse about the debt neither of you wants to name out loud. It makes you avoid the retirement calculator entirely because you're scared of the exact number it might show you. And avoidance, more than any bad investment, more than any market crash, is what quietly bleeds people dry over the years. Not one dramatic mistake, just years and years of simply not looking. There's also a specific flavor of this that hits people around 40 particularly hard. Comparison to family. To siblings who seem to have it together. To parents who, by this age, already owned a home outright, or had made it by whatever definition felt true at the time. To friends who post vacations you can't currently justify, homes you're not sure you'll ever afford, a version of stability that looks effortless from a distance, even when it almost never actually is. I want to say something plainly, because I don't think it gets said enough. You are not required to explain your financial timeline to anyone. Not to your parents, not to your siblings, not to the version of yourself you thought you'd be by now. Everyone's chapter is timed differently, shaped by things you can't see from the outside. Divorces, medical bills, industries that collapsed, children who needed more than the average family budget accounts for, jobs that vanished through no fault of the person who lost them. The psychological reset isn't about pretending the shame doesn't exist, because it does, and pretending never actually makes it go away. It's about separating the shame from the decision-making. You can feel embarrassed about where you are and still open the account today. You can feel behind and still make the call to the advisor. You can feel judged, even by people who never actually said a single judgmental word out loud, and still sit down at the kitchen table and look at the real numbers together, honestly. Because here's the quiet truth underneath all of this. The moment you stop needing your finances to prove your worth is the exact moment you become capable of actually fixing them. Not before. Not after some external validation finally arrives from somewhere outside yourself. Right there, in that specific moment of separating the two, is where real, lasting change becomes possible. In the next part, I want to bring you 5 real stories. People who rebuilt after divorce, after bankruptcy, after job loss, after starting over completely from nothing, and show you exactly what they did differently. Not miracles, just decisions, made one at a time, by ordinary people who simply stopped letting shame write the story for them. Let me introduce you to 5 people whose stories stuck with me long after I first heard them. I've changed some details to protect their privacy, but the core of each story is real. And I think at least one of them is going to feel uncomfortably close to your own life. The first is a woman named Carol. Divorced at 43, after 20 years of marriage together, she walked away from that relationship with almost nothing in her own name. The house was in both their names, but the equity got split in a way that left her renting again, starting over in her own words. Like a 22-year-old with a 43-year-old's body and none of the energy. What Carol did differently wasn't dramatic. She didn't take some huge risk or land a windfall. She got a full-time job with benefits, even though it paid less than she felt she deserved after 2 decades of managing a household. She automated $50 a week into a retirement account before she let herself see the number in her checking account. $50, not $500, $50, because $50, done every week without fail, was something she could actually sustain without resentment, building up, and eventually breaking the habit. 5 years later, at 48, Carol has a modest but real retirement account. No debt left over from the divorce, and something she told me mattered more than the money itself. She trusts herself again. That trust, she said, was the actual asset. The money was just proof of it. The second is a man named Derek, who filed for bankruptcy at 41 after a business he'd poured a decade into collapsed during a downturn that had nothing to do with his effort or his skill. He described the bankruptcy filing as the most humiliating day of his adult life. What Derek did differently was refuse to let that day define the next decade. He took a job, not his dream role, just a job, in an industry adjacent to the one he'd lost. He rebuilt his credit slowly, using one secured credit card, paid in full every single month for 2 straight years. By 46, his credit score had fully recovered, and he'd started a small side venture, funded entirely in cash, with none of the leverage that had sunk him the first time. The third is Maria, who lost her job at 45 after 17 years at the same company. During a round of layoffs she never saw coming. She told me the scariest part wasn't the job loss itself. It was realizing she'd built her entire financial identity around one employer's stability. What she did differently was treat the job search itself like a financial project. She tracked her severance like a runway, calculated exactly how many months she had before she needed a paycheck, and used that pressure to negotiate a better role instead of panicking into the first offer. She landed a position 8 months later at a meaningfully higher salary than she'd ever been making before the layoff happened. The fourth is James, a career changer who walked away from a stable but soul-crushing corporate job at 44 to become a licensed electrician. Financially, it looked reckless on paper. A temporary pay cut, years of apprenticeship at an age when most people are trying to climb, not restart. What James did differently was run the numbers honestly before he leapt, not after. He built an 18-month emergency fund specifically sized to cover the transition, and he made the change gradually, working part-time in his old field while he trained, instead of quitting cold and hoping it worked out. The fifth is a couple, Robert and Linda, who at 46 realized they'd spent 15 years accumulating debt, disguised as a comfortable life. 2 car payments, a home equity loan for renovations they couldn't really afford, credit cards carrying balances they'd stopped even looking at. Month after month. What they did differently was have one brutally honest conversation, the kind most couples avoid for years out of fear of what it might reveal. They listed every debt, every interest rate on paper, together at their kitchen table, and committed to a payoff order based on math, not emotion, not pride. 11 months later, they were debt-free outside their mortgage for the first time in over a decade, and Linda later told me the relief felt almost physical, like she could finally breathe all the way in. Here's what all 5 of these stories have in common, and I want you to actually hear this part, because it matters more than any single detail I've given you so far. None of them involved a lottery ticket. None of them involved some genius investment nobody else knew about, some secret only insiders had access to. Every single one involved an uncomfortable, honest look at where they actually stood, followed by a decision. Not a perfect decision, just a decision. Made and repeated, quietly, month after month, until the results became undeniable, even to the person who had once doubted themselves the most. If you're still here, this deep into the video, I want to say something before we continue. You didn't click on this because you're lazy or careless with money. You clicked because part of you is still fighting for a different outcome. That matters more than you probably give yourself credit for. So if you're finding value in this conversation, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed to the channel and joined us here every day. We talk about exactly this. Real numbers, real timelines, no shame, no shortcuts, just honest conversations about building something that lasts at whatever age you're starting from. And I want to ask you something, because I read every comment. What's the number in your head right now? The one you're scared to say out loud? The age you think you should have had it figured out by? Type it in the comments. I promise, you are not the only one reading this who's carried it alone. All right, let's get back to it. There's more I need to tell you. We've talked about the myth, the mistakes, the real math, the shame underneath it all, and 5 people who proved the story wrong. But there's one more piece, and it might be the most important. What happens once you stop treating money like a scoreboard and start treating it like a tool? Because here's something that surprised me the first time I understood it. The goal was never really the number. 6 figures in a retirement account, a paid-off mortgage, a certain balance on a certain date. None of that is actually what people are chasing. What they're actually chasing is the feeling underneath the number. Safety. The ability to sleep through the night without that specific 2 a.m. spiral. The ability to say yes to your grandchild's college fund, or no to a job slowly killing you, purely because the money gives you the option. That distinction changes how you build from here. If the goal is the feeling, not the figure, the plan doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be sustainable. Something you can stick with for the next 25 years, not something so aggressive you abandon it in 8 months out of exhaustion. I want to give you something practical here, because I don't want to leave you with just philosophy. Pick one number this week. Not a 5-year plan, not a full overhaul. One number. How much you can realistically automate into savings or investing every month, starting now, without wrecking your ability to live your actual life. Then automate it. Take the decision-making out of it entirely, because willpower runs out, but automation doesn't ask permission. Then 6 months from now, revisit that number. Not to judge yourself, just to ask, can I increase this slightly? Can I redirect one more expense that grew quietly without me noticing? That's the whole system. Not complicated, not glamorous, just repeatable in a way that survives contact with real life. The birthdays, the emergencies, the months when everything feels tight. There's a version of you, 5 years from now, looking back at tonight. What that version remembers isn't whether you started with $500 or $50. What they remember is whether you started at all or let one more year slide by, telling yourself you'd figure it out once things settled down. Things rarely settle down. They just become the new normal you learn to build within. That's not a discouraging thought. It's actually the most freeing one in this entire video, because it means you don't need perfect conditions to begin. You only need today, and the smallest honest step you're willing to take in it. I also want to say something about the people around you while doing this work, because rebuilding rarely happens in isolation, even when it feels that way at 2 a.m. Talk to someone you trust about where you stand. Not for advice, necessarily, just for the relief of not carrying it silently. Shame survives in silence. It weakens the moment you say the true number out loud to another human being who doesn't flinch. And if you don't have that person yet, that's all right too. Sometimes the first honest conversation about money is the one you have with yourself, written down, unfiltered, admitting where things stand without softening it and without punishing yourself either. That page becomes the starting line. Not a perfect one, just a real one. I think about how different this conversation would have felt to me 20 years ago if someone had said, calmly, without judgment, that 40 wasn't a deadline, that the shame I was carrying wasn't a fact. It was just a feeling. And feelings, however loud, are not the same as truth. I didn't have that conversation then. I'm having it with you now. And I mean every word of it. You are allowed to want more for the second half of your life than fear and quiet regret. You are allowed to start small and still take it seriously. You are allowed to have made mistakes with money and still be exactly the person who turns it around from here, steadily, without needing anyone's permission. Let's come back to where we started. That number on the screen at 2 a.m., the one that felt like a verdict. It was never a verdict. It was just a snapshot. One frame in a much longer film you haven't finished making yet. You get to decide what happens in the next scene, and the one after that, and the one after that. for as many years as you're willing to keep showing up for the work. Think about everything we've walked through together. The myth that told you 40 was a deadline, when the data says it's closer to your peak. The 3 quiet mistakes: lifestyle inflation, comparison, delayed investing, that made you feel behind, even while you were doing more right than you gave yourself credit for. The real numbers, the actual timeline, foundation to acceleration to protection, proving that starting today still leads somewhere real. The shame underneath all of it, the lie that your net worth was ever your self-worth. 5 people, Carol, Derek, Maria, James, Robert, and Linda, who stood exactly where you're standing now and simply refused to stay there. None of them had a secret. None of them had a shortcut. What they had was the willingness to look honestly at where they stood, and then take one small, repeatable action, instead of waiting for a perfect moment that was never actually coming. You have that same willingness. I know you do, because you're still here, at the end of an hour-long conversation about money and shame and starting over. And most people who feel nothing when they hear those words click away in the first 3 minutes. You didn't. That tells me something about you that no bank statement ever could. Here's what I want you to carry out of this video. More than any number, more than any strategy. 40 isn't a closing door. It's a hinge. Everything before this moment was preparation. Even the parts that felt like failure. Even the years you'd rather forget. Everything after this moment is yours to build, deliberately, without needing anyone's permission, and without needing to explain yourself to anyone who wasn't there for the hard parts. The account you open tomorrow morning won't feel dramatic. The $50 you automate this week won't feel like enough. That's fine. That's how every real thing starts. Quietly, almost invisibly, until one day you look back and realize the curve finally bent. Exactly the way I told you it would. I don't know your specific number. I don't know your specific story. The divorce, the layoff, the business that didn't work out, the years you spent taking care of everyone except yourself. But I know this. The version of you sitting here right now, listening to the very end of this, is not the same version who clicked on this video an hour ago. Something in you has already shifted. You just haven't proven it to yourself with action yet. I think about the people I've met over the years who spent so long waiting for permission. From a spouse, a parent, some imagined authority figure who was supposed to tell them it was okay to start. That permission never comes from outside. It was never going to. The only permission that matters is the one you give yourself, quietly, without fanfare. The moment you decide your future self deserves the effort your current self is capable of giving. There's a particular kind of peace that comes from finally putting a number to your fear, instead of letting it live as a vague, formless dread in the back of your mind. Fear left unexamined grows bigger in the dark than it ever was in the light. But fear, once you name it, once you write it down and look at it directly, tends to shrink into something manageable. Specific, solvable problems, instead of one overwhelming, shapeless weight you carry everywhere you go. That's really what this entire hour has been about. Underneath the numbers and the timelines and the stories. Not a strategy session, an invitation to stop carrying something that was never yours to carry alone. So prove it. Not tomorrow, not next Monday. Tonight, if you can. Open the account. Make the call. Have the conversation you've been avoiding. Automate the $50. Whatever the smallest true step is for you, Take it before you close this tab. If this conversation meant something to you, subscribe to the channel and share it with 5 people who need to hear it exactly as much as you did tonight. A sibling comparing themselves to someone else's highlight reel. A friend who filed for bankruptcy and hasn't told anyone. A parent who thinks it's too late to fix what they've spent decades avoiding. You might be the reason someone else's 2 a.m. finally goes quiet. Leave a comment and be honest in it. Tell me where you actually are, not where you wish you were. And tell me what you want me to cover next, because this channel exists for exactly this conversation, the one most people are too afraid to have out loud. 40 isn't the end of your financial story. It's the page where the story finally starts making sense. I'll see you in the next one.